Montana Territory, late October of 1874. The wind came hard off the crazy mountains, dragging sleet and ash-gray skies down across the valley. Kade Callahan pulled his coat tighter around him, boots sinking into the half-frozen mud as he stepped off his porch. The storm had rolled in fast, too fast for anyone to be wandering alone. That was why he stopped dead when he saw her. She stood at the edge of his fence line, near the cottonwoods that bent and creaked under the weight of the storm. A woman barefoot, soaked to the bone, dress clinging to her legs. Her arms cradled a bundled baby, swaddled in a thin wool blanket already darkened with rain. Her face was pale, lips trembling, but she did not move. She just stared toward the cabin like it was the last thing left standing in her world. Kade's heart kicked hard in his chest. He stepped forward, hands raised just enough to show he meant no harm. "Come in out of the cold," he said, voice steady, low. She blinked finally, eyes wide and dazed, then nodded and stepped forward. Her knees buckled once, but she caught herself, tightening her hold on the baby. He met her halfway and reached for the child first. "Let me help." She hesitated, then slowly let him take the baby into his arms. The infant was warm but fussing, tiny hands curled into fists. Kade moved fast then, guiding the woman toward the cabin, throwing open the door and ushering her inside. The fire was already lit. He laid the baby on a thick quilt near the hearth and turned back. She stood just inside the door, dripping, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "I'm not gonna hurt you," Kade said gently. "You sit. I'll get you dry things." She nodded again, still silent, and sank onto the bench near the fireplace. Kade grabbed one of his old shirts and a blanket from the loft and handed them over. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, then finally spoke. "Thank you." Her voice was rough, hoarse from the wind. She reached down, checked the baby, then looked up at him. "My name's Zadie Green, Kade Callahan." He gave her a nod, then crouched near the baby. "What's the little one's name?" "Ada." He smiled as the baby blinked up at him, calmer now that she was warm. "She looks strong." Zadie gave a small smile back, something fragile flickering behind her eyes. "She is." He stood and stepped away, giving her room. "There's stew on the stove. Let me get you some." She did not argue. She just sat, holding the baby close again, watching the fire like it might disappear. By the time she had eaten, her color had returned and her hands had stopped shaking. Kade poured her a tin cup of water and sat across from her. "You want to tell me what happened?" Zadie looked down at Ada, then back up at him. "I was in Billings. My husband died 3 months ago. He was a ranch hand. We had nowhere to go after." Kade nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "There was a man," Zadie said tightly. "He offered us work and board. Said I could help in the kitchen, Ada could sleep in the storeroom, but he lied. He tried to touch me, wouldn't stop. I ran in the middle of the night." She swallowed hard, voice shaking now. "I did not know where I was going, just away. I followed the tracks as long as I could, but then the storm hit." Kade's jaw tightened. He stared into the fire for a moment. "You did right." She looked up, startled. "You did right by running," he said again. "You got out, you kept her safe." Zadie's eyes filled, but she nodded. "I did not think anyone'd help us." "Well," Kade said, standing, "you found the right fence line." He moved to the shelves and pulled down another blanket. "You and Ada stay here tonight. That storm's not letting up." Zadie clutched the baby tighter. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." He said it without thinking, and when she looked at him again, something passed between them, something quiet but solid. He saw it in her eyes, relief maybe, or the first flicker of trust. That night, Zadie and Ada slept in his bed while Kade took the floor by the fire. He stirred once in the early hours, hearing the baby fuss, and turned to see Zadie pacing gently, whispering to her daughter. She caught him watching and whispered, "Sorry." He shook his head, voice low. "She is just fine." Zadie looked down at Ada, then back at him. "I have not been warm in weeks." Kade sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. "You are safe here." The next morning, the storm had passed. Snow clung to the trees and the mountains were crisp against the sky. Kade stepped out to check on his horses. When he came back, Zadie was cooking eggs with Ada in a sling against her chest, humming soft and low. She turned when she heard him and smiled. "Hope you do not mind. I thought I should do something." He crossed the room and looked down at Ada. "You both slept all right," Zadie nodded. Better than I have in a long time." He reached out, brushing a bit of hair from Zadie's face without thinking. "You look better too," she blushed, but did not pull away. "Thank you, Kade." They ate together, then spent the afternoon stacking the firewood Kade had chopped earlier that week. Zadie insisted on helping, and though he could see her arms tired quick, she never complained. That night, after Ada was asleep on a pallet by the fire, Kade sat beside Zadie on the bench. The silence between them was comfortable now. "I do not have anywhere to go," she said finally. He turned to her. "You can stay." Her eyes searched his. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you need help." "And because I want to." She looked down, then back up at him. "You are kind," he smiled, slow and sure. "You make it easy." Zadie laughed softly, the sound warm and real. Then her hand found his, and she did not let go. Kade looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "You are safe now, Zadie, I promise." And for the first time in months, she believed it. The next days settled into a rhythm that neither of them spoke aloud, but both leaned into. Mornings came cold and blue, frost thick on the cabin windows, and Kade would rise first, stoke the fire, and lay out oats for the mule. Zadie would follow not long after, barefoot until her boots warmed near the hearth, Ada tucked against her chest in a sling she'd sewn from an old curtain. Kade watched her adjust quickly to the land, quiet but not timid, always listening, noticing. She didn't ask for more than she needed, and when she spoke, it was with thought behind her words. On the 5th morning, he came in from checking the snare lines with a hair in one hand and a rough bruise blooming across his knuckles. Zadie glanced up from the table, where she was mending a rip in one of his flannel shirts. "Fence give you trouble," came across a wolf caught in the trap. Half-starved, but still had fight in him. She sat back, needle paused mid-stitch. "Did you kill it?" "No, let him go." He set the hair down. "Didn't feel right, trapping something that was already too thin to stand." Zadie nodded once, like she understood something deeper than the words he'd said. "That's a hard mercy." He drew in a breath, leaning against the doorframe. "You ever think about leaving here?" She set the shirt aside. "Not lately." "Would you want to?" Her eyes didn't leave his. "I used to think I had to keep moving to stay safe. Now I think maybe standing still might be braver." That night after dinner, Kade brought down a small wooden box from the loft. He set it on the table between them and opened the lid. Inside were scraps of paper, some yellowing, others newer. Bits of graphite stubs, a dried ink pot, a bent quill. At the bottom, a worn Bible with the cover half torn away. "My mother used to write letters she never sent," he said. Said it helped keep her from going cold inside. Zadie reached in and picked up one of the folded pages. Her thumb brushed the corner. "Who'd you write to?" "No one. Not since she passed, just kept the habit." "May I read one?" He nodded. She unfolded a slip and read silently for a while. After a long moment, she said, "This one sounds like it was written to someone you missed." It was. She folded it again, careful with the edges. "You ever get an answer?" "No," he said quietly. But writing it down was enough most days. She reached across the table and laid her hand gently atop his. "You can write to me if you need." He looked at her, the firelight catching on the curve of her cheek. "I don't think I'd need to." "You're already here." That night, she didn't ask him to sleep on the floor. She didn't say anything at all, just turned down the quilt and climbed into the bed, Ada curled beside her. Then she looked over her shoulder and waited. He crossed the room slowly, not because he was unsure, but because something in him wanted the moment to last. When he lay down beside her, inches apart, she turned toward him and tucked her hand into his. Neither of them spoke. Snow came heavy 2 days later, thick and wet, burying the barn halfway up the wall. Kade dug a path to the woodpile while Zadie boiled beans and salt pork over the fire, humming a tune that seemed older than both of them. He came in with snow melting down his collar, boots dripping, and she laughed soft and breathless, like it surprised her to feel something so light. "You look like the mule dragged you through the river," she said. He peeled off his coat and stood by the fire. "Feels about right." She scooped stew into a bowl and handed it to him. "You know, Ada's started watching you like she watches rain. Quiet and serious, like you might crack open and show her something." He looked down at the baby, who was blinking slowly from her pallet, one tiny hand curled around a bit of string she'd found beneath the table. "She's got good instincts," he said. Zadie smiled into her cup, and for a long time neither of them said anything more. That evening, as she rocked Ada near the hearth, she looked over at him. "You ever think about what comes next?" He leaned back in the chair, arms folded behind his head. "Most days I'm just trying to keep the chimney from smoking too bad." She tilted her head. "I mean really next, not just the chores." He studied the way her hair had come loose at the nape of her neck. "I guess I've been thinking about a spring garden, maybe some hens, maybe. Someone to help keep it all going. You wouldn't mind that?" "No," he said it like a vow. "Not one bit." She nodded slowly, rocking Ada until her little eyes closed, then she looked straight at him. "I think I'd like to plant something too," and just like that, the air between them shifted. Not sudden, just steady, like snow melting into ground ready to be turned. By late November, the days shortened fast, light fading behind the ridge before supper even finished cooking. Kade set a lantern in the window each evening, more for habit than need, but Zadie said she liked it, said it made the dark feel less empty. Neither of them mentioned the way their steps had started to fall in time, or how Ada reached for Kade now without hesitation, her tiny fingers tugging at the buttons of his worn shirts when he lifted her from the cradle. They moved as one without speaking of it. When he chopped wood, she stacked it. When she kneaded dough, he stoked the stove just enough to keep the warmth steady. What began as survival had shifted into something measured, something chosen. One morning, Kade returned from the far pasture with his shoulder stiff from a fall. The mule had slipped on the ice near a creek, and though Kade caught himself before anything broke, the ache in the joint made it hard to lift his arm. Zadie saw it as soon as he stepped through the door. "You're favoring your left. I'm fine." "You're not," she said, crossing the room. "Let me see." He winced as she helped him peel off the coat. Her hands were firm and sure as she examined the swelling near his collarbone. "You didn't break it, but it's strained. You need to rest it. Can't rest with the fence still down near the north paddock." "I'll go." Kade laughed once, short and quiet. "You?" "I handled worse than a loose fence in Billings," she said. "Besides, you can show me what needs doing, and I'll manage the hammer." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." They bundled Ada in her wrap, tucked her into a sling across Zadie's chest, and stepped out into the brittle morning. Frost clung to the sagebrush, and the air carried the dry bite of coming snow. Kade walked her to the break in the fence, showing her where the post had shifted and which plank needed replacing. She listened carefully, asked only once about the angle of the nails, then got to work. Kade stood by, his good hand in his pocket, watching as she worked. Her sleeves were rolled up, arms steady as she drove each nail with focus. Ada slept soundly against her, rocked by the rhythm of her mother's movement. "You've done this before," he said. "Not exactly," she replied, not looking up. "But I used to repair floorboards in the boarding house kitchen. The tools aren't much different." He smiled quietly to himself. "You surprise me. Good or bad, good." That night after supper, he found her standing by the window, Ada asleep in her arms. She was staring out at the snow beginning to fall again, soft and slow. "I used to think quiet like this meant something was about to go wrong," she said. He came to stand beside her, and now, she turned toward him. "Now it just feels like peace." He reached out, brushing his fingers along Ada's tiny foot where it peeked from the blanket. "You're not waiting to run anymore." "I don't think I could, even if I tried." Kade met her gaze. "Then stay." Her breath caught. She didn't cry, Zadie didn't do that, not anymore, but she looked at him with something raw and open. "You mean that?" He nodded, slow and sure. "I want you both here, not because I feel sorry, not because you need a place. Because I want to build something with you." Zadie laid Ada gently into the cradle, her movements careful. Then she stepped to him, closer than she'd ever dared before, and took his hand. "I want that too." He leaned down, their foreheads touching, breath mingling in the hush of the cabin. Outside, the snow came steady. Inside, the warmth between them settled deep, like roots stretching quietly into winter ground, waiting for spring. By early December, the snow packed firm along the trails that twisted through the valley, and the sky stayed a pale pewter most days. The kind of winter that settled deep in the bones and didn't let go easy. Cade's right shoulder had healed enough to swing an axe again, though he still favored it when he thought she wasn't looking. Zadie noticed anyway, but didn't push. Instead, she picked up the weight where she could quietly, as if the doing itself meant more than the saying. That morning, Cade had taken down the last of the elk jerky from the cellar, and Zadie stood at the table separating sinew from meat with a practiced rhythm. Ada babbled softly from the cradle, batting a wooden spoon against her wool blanket like it was something important. Cade leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You always this good with a blade," Zadie didn't glance up. "Used to clean rabbits for supper when I was barely tall enough to see over the counter. You learn what you need." He stepped closer, watching her fingers work. "You ever wish you'd had something different?" She paused, set the knife down, and wiped her hands on her apron. "All the time. I used to dream about teaching girls to read. Had a plan once to go to Helena, maybe work in one of the mission schools." "What stopped you?" She met his eyes. "Marriage, then Ada, then losing everything." Cade didn't speak for a long while. The wind rattled faintly at the windows and the fire popped behind them. "You still could," he said finally. "Doesn't have to be Helena, doesn't have to be a school." Zadie tilted her head. "You think there's girls out here who'd want to learn? There's a family down in the river bend with 5 daughters. I'd bet on at least 2 of them being curious." She smiled, a quiet pulling at the corners of her mouth. "You think if I taught them letters and scripture, their father wouldn't run me off for putting ideas in their heads?" Cade shrugged. "You've got a way of making hard things sound sensible. That might go further than you think." She picked up the knife again. "You've got some ideas about me." He stepped closer. "I've been watching you. That's not the same as guessing." Zadie didn't answer, but she didn't pull away when his hand brushed her shoulder. The nearness between them had stopped feeling careful. It had become a kind of ease. That afternoon, they rode out together to check the trap lines along the tree line. Cade took the reins while Zadie held Ada close against her chest, the baby's face half hidden beneath the edge of her mother's kerchief. The air bit sharp, but the sky had cleared for once and sunlight glinted off the pines. They stopped near a frozen creek where 2 traps had gone untouched. Cade climbed down, boots crunching through the frost, and reset one of the lines while Zadie scanned the tree line. "You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't come this way?" she asked. He didn't look up right away. "Probably still here, same ground, same quiet." "And if I hadn't come," he stood, brushing snow from his gloves. "Then I'd still be alone." Zadie's gaze lingered on him, her hand resting lightly on Ada's back. "You don't say much about before." "No reason to. Most of it's behind me for good. But not all of it." He met her eyes. "Not the part that brought me here." That night, Cade carved a small wooden horse by the fire, smoothing the edges with the side of his knife. He handed it to Ada when he finished. She gripped it with both hands, then promptly tried to chew the ear. Zadie laughed softly and looked at Cade. "You ever make toys before?" "Not until now." She reached out and touched his wrist. "You're good with her." "I want to be." Zadie's hand stayed where it was. "I never thought I'd say this, but I don't miss the road. I don't miss wondering if someone will knock on the door and mean harm." "You've got a door now," he said, "and no one's getting through it unless you open it." She looked over at the cradle where Ada had fallen asleep curled around the wooden horse, then back at him. "I want to marry you." Cade didn't flinch. He didn't blink either. He just took her hand fully in his and held it between both of his. "Then let's do it." Zadie exhaled, something deep and long, like she'd been holding it in for months. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She nodded, and her voice came gentle. "Then I will." The snow continued falling outside, soft and slow, as the light from the fire danced across the cabin walls. Inside, the promise between them settled in like something permanent, quiet, steady, and finally, whole. The morning they were wed, the valley wore a hush so complete it felt like the earth held its breath. Snow lay clean and unbroken across the pasture, untouched since the last storm. Inside the cabin, Zadie fastened the last button of her wool bodice with hands that didn't tremble, not from fear or doubt, but from the strange stillness that came when something old finally settled into its place. Cade stood by the door, coat already on, his collar brushed clean. He'd washed and shaved that morning, and though he hadn't said much, she had seen how carefully he'd laid out his clothes the night before, folded square on the chest by the hearth. "You ready?" he asked, voice low. Zadie turned, checked the wrap on Ada's blanket once more, and nodded. "Let's go." They walked the mile and a half to the preacher's cabin, Ada bundled snug between them. The trail narrowed through the pines, branches heavy with snow, and Kade carried the baby most of the way while Zadie walked just behind, watching his back move steady beneath the weight. The clouds had cleared, and the sun caught in the ice-crusted branches, throwing flecks of light across the trail like glass. The preacher met them at his stoop, a wiry man with a crooked gait and a Bible worn to its threads. His wife, a kind-eyed woman with a limp from an old burn, took Ada inside to warm her hands while the vows were spoken beneath the open sky. "Do you come of your own choosing?" the preacher asked. Zadie looked at Kade. "I do." "And you?" Kade held her gaze. "I do." There were no rings, no guests, no music, just the sound of wind threading through the trees and Ada's soft coo from inside the cabin. When the preacher gave his blessing, Kade reached for her hand and held it like he'd never let it go again. They walked home slower than they'd come, the sun dipping behind the ridge as they crossed back into the valley. Zadie's fingers stayed laced through his, warm against the cold. Ada slept soundly in the sling against her chest, her breath small and even. That evening they sat together at the table, a simple stew warming between them. Kade handed her a cup and touched his thumb to the inside of her wrist. "I don't have words for it," he said, "but I know it's real." "You don't need words," Zadie replied. "You've shown me enough." They didn't rush the night. After Ada was laid down, they moved slowly through the quiet, learning the shape of one another without distance between them. There was no ceremony in it, no need for speech, only the warmth of skin and the comfort of breath shared close. The days that followed came gentle. Kade replaced the cracked window pane on the west wall. Zadie began teaching the girls from the river bend, starting with the letters carved into an old pine board. Ada took her first steps in the snow-packed yard, arms outstretched toward whatever light caught her eye. When Kade came in from the barn one afternoon, he found Zadie kneeling by the stove, showing Ada how to roll dough between her palms. "She's good with her hands," Zadie said, not looking up. "She gets that from her mother. She gets her quiet from you." Kade crouched beside them, his hand resting on the small of Zadie's back. "I've been thinking about building a second room, give her space to grow." Zadie glanced at him. "You think we'll be here that long?" "I hope so." She leaned against him, just enough to share weight. "Then let's build it together." And they did. Spring came slow, but it came. The creek thawed, the trees budded, and the fence line held through the melt. Kade dug the posts for the new room with his own hands, and Zadie helped lay the joists by lantern light after Ada had gone to sleep. The girls from the river bend came twice a week now, and their father started leaving eggs and flour at the gate without a word. Kade never wrote letters anymore. He didn't need to. One evening, with Ada curled between them and the sun slipping through the slats, Zadie turned to him. "You ever think we're owed this peace?" Kade shook his head. "Not owed, but we held on long enough to find it." She smiled, soft as dusk. "I think we were made for it." He kissed her temple, and she leaned into him until the light faded and the room filled with the quiet sound of Ada's breathing. They never left the valley. Not because they couldn't, but because everything they needed had grown from the cold ground they'd once feared. Their days were honest, their nights warm, and nothing was taken for granted. Not the fire, not the roof, not the hand always waiting at the end of the day. And through every season that followed, they stayed together, steady, whole.